LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the November 25th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 16 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis for you all tonight. For the political comedy sources, there's no Real Time with Bill Maher, there's no Saturday Night Live. Actually, most shows were off this week, at least at the end of the week. So I have some pretty minor, sort of subtle jokes I took from Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press and Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday this morning. They'll be the first two clips I play of the 16 clips that all come from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. The main overarching topic I have is the turn of the tide, turn of the Trump tide. It's kind of a reference, I guess, to Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, when Gandalf the White comes back and he says, "I am Gandalf the White, and I come now at the turn of the tide." This could be the turn of the tide of the Trump presidency. There's all sorts of things that are about to happen, especially it's Mueller time still. It's about to happen. More stuff from Mueller is expected in the next couple weeks. The Democrats are taking over the House in about a month. So this could be the turn of the tide. I don't know, maybe it's presumptuous of me. And so I'm also covering some other important issues. Immigration, the one non-Sunday morning news analysis show clip I picked out is from MSNBC's Kasie DC, covering what happened in San Ysidro near San Diego this morning, having to do with immigration. And I have a couple clips on that. Climate change, big report, kind of hidden by the Trump administration by releasing it on Black Friday, the Friday before or the Friday after Thanksgiving, which is a really low news day. So I'll have a couple clips on that climate change report, and then finally a couple clips on Saudi Arabia and some rare agreement between Bernie Sanders and a conservative Republican about the war in Yemen. That'll be the final clip. Also, the first newsmaker clip I have Alan Dershowitz in the title because he said the Mueller report is probably going to be devastating. So that's part of it's Mueller time topic. And down in the video description, not only is there a link to my clip list here, so you can follow along my notes for my 16 clips, but I've also put the names of the subtopics, which for the recorded show viewers, I will put time indexes where you can go between the different topics however you want to do it. And then for both live and recorded show viewers, over here in the corner there's a poll where after you watch or as you're watching, I may make an edited produced video out of a smaller part of this live video. I used to do that, and since I have so many subtopics, I could make a small video on any of the 4 subtopics. And so there's a poll here that you can take in the corner and tell me which of the 4 subtopics do you think would make the best edited produced video, if you think that's a good idea. Because the whole show is going to be like an hour. I could probably cut one of those down to 5, 10, 15 minutes. So let me know what you think sometime during the video. If it occurs to you, give me that answer. But like I said, I have 2 sort of subtle, minor political comedy jokes, both having to do with the word house. And the first one actually has some important backward-looking news. Most of the clips are things that are going to possibly be happening in the future or happening right now. This looks back at the midterms. And was it a blue wave? Well, that is a question that Chuck Todd answers both ways, as you might have talking at your Thanksgiving table, which is how Chuck Todd introduces the clip and makes a very subtle joke, which I will repeat the phrase I think was the subtle minor joke to begin the show over here.
Welcome back, data download time. Chances are this Thanksgiving you probably found yourself gathered around the family table arguing about politics. And one of those arguments probably went a little something like this. It was a blue wave. No, it wasn't. Well, at least at my house. So what's the deal? Well, Democrats are going to net at least 38 seats in the House. And with 2 GOP-held seats still undecided, it's possible the Democrats could get up to 40. Historically, that's big. The last time Democrats gained this many seats in a midterm was 1974, the post-Watergate election. 1 point for Team Wave. Democrats also won the National House popular vote by a whopping 8.9 million votes, 53-45, 8 points. In the GOP's last two wave elections, 94 and 2010, Republicans won the popular vote by a smaller margin. So that's another point for Team Wave. But was it a wave? Maybe not. Republicans knocked off Democratic senators in North Dakota, Missouri, Florida, and Indiana, while losing only in Arizona and Nevada. As of now, they're +2 in the upper chamber. A real wave should have saved 2 or 3 of those vulnerable incumbent Democrats, and 2 of them lost by 6 points each. Point for Team No Wave. There were also some high-profile losses for the Democrats. Nail-biters in Georgia's governor's race and Florida's governor and Senate races all went to the Republicans. Plus, in Ohio, Democrats lost every big race except for hanging on to Sherrod Brown's seat, and they hung on to that by a smaller than expected margin. All points for No Wave. Look, there are strong points for both sides of this argument, and the strongest point for the pro-wave side are the House results, coast to coast. But it may be more accurate to describe this election as a realignment, not only because of the results in states like Missouri, Ohio, Indiana, Florida, and Georgia, but because of the strong turnout for both parties. In a wave election, one side usually stays home, demoralized. That didn't happen in 2018. When we come back, could Democrats...
I don't know, and I guess for that last point, you could give credit to Donald Trump for that. I mean, he may have increased the turnout of the Democrats, but they were already highly energized, and he maybe energized his base, and that's why both sides turned out, and that is one of the things that makes it not a wave. I mean, I think I agree, of course, more with the blue wave talking points. I didn't really discuss it that much at my Thanksgiving dinner. By the way, the joke phrase, very minor, subtle joke from Chuck Todd, at least at my house, I believe that was but-um-bump. No, there's no, I mean, just like that's the way that's what they're talking about at Thanksgiving at the Todd residence, I assume, is a very subtle joke. And then there's another, I think, house-related joke at the beginning of this Fox News Sunday clip. Fox News Sunday had kind of a different view of how the news week went. I'll show you that when I get to the news summaries. I have 4 of the 5 corporate outlet news summaries. No CBS Face the Nation, but I'll start with NBC and I'll end with Fox News, which, like I said, is kind of a different version where they really focused on, division and tribalism, not caused by Donald Trump, but as, a phenomenon in America. And when I show the news summary, I'll show you that they had like a fair and balanced Fox News guest lineup. It was the establishment Republicans, Senator Ben Sasse, and then the 2 crazy Republicans, David Bossie and Corey Lewandowski, who worked for Trump. And I'm not going to have any clips of David Bossie and Corey Lewandowski. If you want to see the whole thing, there's a link down in the video description. You can watch Fox News Sunday yourself. But the introduction talked about this whole divisiveness and the Trump's enemies, and it has another house joke, I think, which I will explain to you after we watch that 1-minute 4-second clip before we get to the real news clips. And I'll talk about it with you, like I said, after we watch together over here.
President Trump enters the second half of his term facing many challenges, but is one of the biggest coming from inside his own White House. Joining me now for their first interview, the authors of the new book, Trump's Enemies, How the Deep State is Undermining the Presidency. The president's first campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, now senior advisor to the vice president's PAC, Great America Committee, and former Trump deputy campaign manager, David Bossie. David, Corey, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. I want to start with the title of your book, Trump's Enemies, in which you include, among his enemies, not only Democrats, but the intelligence community, the administrative state, the media, and the establishment. Corey, is that really how you see the world of politics in Washington? You just heard Ben Sasse call that a warped, weird, lonely view of the world.
Well, I respect Senator Sasse.
That's actually, I'm not going to show the Ben Sasse clip where he talked about a warped, weird, lonely view of the world, but that's not exactly what he called it. He actually said that people whose first priority who center their lives around politics and not around like family and church and community, that they are like weird and lonely, which is kind of a weird thing to say from a U.S. senator who has pretty much centered his life around politics, like anyone who made it to the U.S. Senate. But I'm not going to show that clip. What was the House joke in there? Well, if you listen at the beginning, I think there's one part where kind of subtly in a very minorly or in a way that is just a little bit humorous, I think Chris Wallace there was trying to say regarding the enemies. They've traced Trump's enemies' calls and they're coming from inside the White House. That's, I don't know. Am I stretching there? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now I'm going to move to the actual news clip, starting with the best news summary as usual. I think coming from NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, starting off with his live summary. This is, he compares the way Bill Clinton and Barack Obama reacted to their congressional losses by admitting the problem and changing, and comparing it to Trump going on the attack. I almost made the title Trump on the Attack, but I think Trump tide turns might be a better predictor of what's going to happen in the next week or two. You know, I said it's Mueller time last week, and I think that may be coming to fruition in the very near future based on, or maybe I'm going to be very disappointed. I know some people think it's going to be disappointing, so you can let me know what you think down in the comment section about all that while we watch Chuck Todd summarize the news, talking about some of the things you just saw already about the way Trump is attacking what Chris Wallace was saying when he talked to David Bossie and Corey Lewandowski there about all the things that Trump's attacking, the courts and the establishment and the press and voting and judges. Yeah, so I will talk about this 4-minute, 11-second. It's the 411 in 4 minutes and 11 seconds from this week. Well, actually from NBC's Meet the Press this morning over here.
Good Sunday morning. When President Clinton lost control of both houses of Congress in 1994, the day after the election, he accepted his share of responsibility. Mr. Clinton then worked with the new Republican majority on issues like welfare reform and balancing the budget. And 2 years later, both were easily reelected, the Republican Congress and President Clinton. When President Obama lost the House in 2010, he called the 63-seat defeat a shellacking. Mr. Obama then worked with Republicans to make the Bush tax cuts permanent, something he had opposed as a candidate. And 2 years later, he and that Republican Congress were easily reelected. The Clinton and Obama experiences are a blinking yellow light to those assuming this year's sweeping Democratic House gains, 38 seats and counting, mean President Trump's re-election chances are in big trouble. But both Mr. Clinton and Mr. Obama accepted the public's rebuke of their presidencies in those midterms, and they pivoted to work with the new opposition in some way. So far, President Trump has done no such thing. In fact, he's sticking to his base-only strategy, even accelerating attacks on those he considers to be his opponents. Since the elections, he's attacked the press again, attacked the judiciary again, attacked our election integrity again, and sided with an authoritarian regime over his own CIA again. Are his assaults on American institutions helpful to his presidency? Politically, they might be, but they're certainly unprecedented.
We get a lot of bad court decisions from the Ninth Circuit, which has become a big thorn in our side.
President Trump using a Thanksgiving teleconference with troops deployed overseas to renew his attacks on the U.S. courts and double down on criticism of Chief Justice John Roberts.
I like him and I respect him, but I think we have to use some common sense.
That's after Roberts, in an extraordinary step by a Chief Justice, rebuked the sitting president for slamming a federal judge who ordered the administration to accept asylum claims from migrants, no matter how they enter the United States.
You go to the Ninth Circuit and it's a disgrace, and I'm going to put in a major complaint. This was an Obama judge.
The judge, John Tiger, does not actually sit on the Ninth Circuit. The ruling was handed down by a district court. Roberts defended an independent judiciary to the Associated Press, saying, "We do not have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them." Mr. Trump's renewed attacks on the courts are just his latest assault on American institutions. He's questioned U.S. elections, claiming without evidence fraud and electoral corruption.
There's a lot of bad stuff going on in this country.
He's relentlessly attacked the media.
These are just dishonest, terrible people.
And this week, he again contradicted his own intelligence community. This time, their assessment of the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, appearing to take the word of the Saudi crown prince instead.
The crown prince hates it more than I do, and they have vehemently denied it. The CIA points it both ways. As I said, maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
House Democrats are promising to examine the Khashoggi murder and the president's financial ties to Saudi Arabia, which Mr. Trump has alluded to for years.
I like the Saudis. They're very nice. I make a lot of money with them. They buy all sorts of my stuff. All kinds of toys from Trump.
The president is also disputing an urgent warning from his own administration on the issue of climate change. The report from 13 federal agencies was intentionally released on Black Friday in order to bury it in the news. The White House dismissed the findings as, quote, largely based on the most extreme scenario. The report warns that if significant steps aren't taken to rein in global warming, climate change could slash the U.S. economy by 10% by the end of the century. Just this week, the president tweeted about East Coast cold weather. Whatever happened to global warming?
I don't know that it's man-made. You'd have to show me the scientists because they have a very big political agenda.
And joining me now is Republican Senator Mike Lee.
And I will have some more on the climate change issue. I thought that pretty much all of the programs, even Fox News Sunday, did a good job of at least bringing up the climate issue that the Trump administration tried to bury, like I said earlier, by releasing the climate change report on the Friday after Thanksgiving on a 4-day weekend here in the United States. So I'll talk about that more. It's the third of the 4 topics that I'll be covering. The ongoing Mueller investigation is topic 1, the immigration issue is topic 2, climate change is topic 3, and then Saudi Arabia is topic 4. Then I do have a bonus Sandy and Dash clip for the Sandy and Dash fans at the end, and for my live viewers, I will explain at that point, when I get to that Sandy and Dash clip, why I had to delay a little the beginning of the show. I had a little accident here getting the Sandy and Dash clip, and I will explain that to you. And we'll also explain why I think the camera angle is a little bit different this week than usual, but like I said, that was the best of the news summaries. It was also the most extensive. It was 4 minutes, 11 seconds. None of the rest of these are that long or even close. So I can't really fault CNN State of the Union for not covering everything that Chuck Todd covered there, because this next clip is only 43 seconds long. Dana Bash was in for Jake Tapper. The State of the Union is on edge, and it's kind of what I was saying before about possible breaks in the Mueller investigation, and you'll also see the talking about the tumultuous week and how Trump is pushing to get things done while he still has a Republican House, and I will talk about those 43 seconds with you a little more maybe after we watch them together over here.
Bash in for Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is on edge. President Trump returns to Washington today after a tumultuous holiday week, determined to push his priorities through Congress before Democrats take control of the House and make his life much more difficult. First on the president's wish list, stemming the tide of immigration at the border. The president tweeted just last night that migrants seeking asylum will stay in Mexico while their claims make their way through U.S. courts. That would amount to a massive overhaul in U.S. policy, but a leader in Mexico's incoming government is now denying reports of a deal. Joining me now, Iowa Senator.
And I don't have any clips of Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. If you look down at my clip list, you'll see I do have a good clip coming up of Dana Bash's interview with Adam Schiff, 2 clips of Adam Schiff. So you can look forward to that. But that, like I said, for a 43-second news summary, that wasn't bad. The same general topic was covered on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They're talking about the next chapter. I don't know, is that kind of like being on the edge, being on edge, waiting for the next thing to happen? Let's just say that the corporate news media has really, maybe they just want me to keep watching all the time, but they are breeding in me a feeling of expectancy that something's going to happen, and that's why I said it's Mueller time last week. There's supposedly a 10-day delay in the Manafort sentencing that's up basically tomorrow, so that might be something. And there are all these sealed indictments that apparently are going to be unsealed. No one knows whether they have to do with the Mueller investigation or not because they're sealed. But anyway, I'll get to that. Some of that stuff is covered in this 1-minute, 19-second news summary from George Stephanopoulos at the beginning of his show this morning. Didn't mention the climate change thing, but they did in their news programs, just not in the summary at the beginning, which could be the most important issue that was discussed, to future generations, which I will discuss later when I get to that topic. But here's the news summary from ABC this morning to compare to the previous two, which I will do with you after we watch together over here.
Good morning. Hope you're enjoying the Thanksgiving weekend. And for all of you who took a break from politics for the holiday, welcome back to a fateful new chapter for the Trump presidency. Just over a month from now, the president will face a Democratic House for the first time. In just over a week, he'll face a choice: shut down the government over his border wall or punt on that promise once and for all. Dozens of presidential contenders are lining up to take him on in 2020. And what could be most consequential, those next moves from special counsel Robert Mueller. The president has finally answered some of his written questions. So will Mueller write his final report or take Trump to court to force more testimony? Tomorrow, we're going to learn if former campaign chair Paul Manafort is following through on his promise to cooperate in the case. More plea deals and indictments are in the works. Mueller may have been silent before the midterms, but his grand jury and his team have been active behind the scenes, spending dozens of hours with multiple witnesses. So now, aside from Trump himself, no single person has more influence over the Trump presidency than Robert Mueller. That's where we start this week with our legal experts. Alan Dershowitz, professor emeritus at Harvard Law School and author of The Case Against Impeaching Trump, and ABC's chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams. Welcome to you both.
And like I said, the first newsmaker clip I have after, there's only one more news summary clip, so the clip after next will be the Alan Dershowitz clip saying that the Mueller report is going to be devastating. He doesn't really talk about his book, The Case Against Impeachment, The Case Against Impeaching Trump, which I bought thinking I might do a review. There's plenty of time before the impeachment to still do a review of Alan Dershowitz's book. But as I pointed out in a previous show, the one thing I was surprised about, and you can't tell in that last some news summary, or at the end of the news summary where they introduce Alan Dershowitz, they don't let you know that his book here, The Case Against Impeaching Trump, it's a very, very little book. It's very small. Look how thin. Very little. I guess The Case Against Impeaching Trump is pretty thin. Pretty thin. And Dershowitz, I don't know, maybe he's trying to win back favor with people on the left and liberals after some of the things he said defensive of Trump. Although he did spend a lot of time defending Trump against allegations from various witnesses who've turned on him because, as a classic criminal defense attorney, I've mentioned, Alan Dershowitz was a very good criminal defense attorney for many years, and he knows that when someone signs a plea deal and gets a benefit from the government, their credibility goes way down, especially when they've committed crimes themselves. So there's a real easy way to impeach their credibility, and that's going to happen. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself because, like I said, the Alan Dershowitz clip is the clip after next. First, before I get to that, I want to share the final news summary from Fox News Sunday. Like I said, it's a little bit of a different spin. It focuses on tribalism and divisiveness, maybe because they have on Senator Ben Sasse, the Republican from Nebraska, who has a book out on tribalism. And I don't know, is it published by Rupert Murdoch? Sometimes they do that and they don't. I didn't have time to look that up. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And like I said, this is it has a lot of the same facts. It talks about who Trump is attacking, but it doesn't really blame Trump for the breakdown or the divisiveness. It puts him... this is something I see on Fox News all the time, where instead of talking about how Trump is like way out of proportion to anything that's ever happened before, they say, oh, it's like part of a problem from before Trump and that will be here after Trump is gone. And I mean, to an extent that's true, but it doesn't mean Trump isn't like one of the worst offenders in the tearing us apart category for America, which I will discuss a little more with you after you watch the 2.5-minute Fox News Sunday news summary. And I've actually added in the like teaser or whatever you want to call it at the beginning before Chris Wallace comes back and says hello again. And this is where they summarize all the topics. And this is where I promised you before you'll see the fair and balanced guest list, where it's like the establishment Republican Ben Sasse, and then the crazy Trump Republicans David Bossie and Corey Lewandowski. And I will talk a little more about the Fox News
2020 campaign. He at odds with the Supreme Court over the involvement of the Khashoggi.
They did not come to a conclusion.
That is, the 13 federal agencies came out with something called the National Climate Assessment on Friday, and
I think there was some little stream error during that clip. I apologize to the live viewers for that. I hope that the whole thing doesn't... I hope the YouTube archive isn't messed up, because I really hate uploading the recorded version of the program and not being able to show the live comments. Last time I had one of those stream errors, it made it take over 48 hours for the archive to finish processing. I hope that doesn't happen. Whatever. You don't need to know all the inside details of my worries of production when I'm making the show, but I think I pretty much criticized that Fox News Sunday news summary before I showed it, and when I talked about it earlier, I think you would agree with me that it's a kind of a different version, although it's still, I mean, a different angle, like almost an alternative universe view, which is what you get on Fox News, or as Chris Hayes on All In with Chris Hayes, a show I enjoy watching, he calls it Trump TV, and I think that's a pretty fair label. I spent over a decade describing Fox News bias on my YouTube channel, and at this point they have become pretty sycophantic, pretty much what I've said many times during shows in the past months or couple years now of the Trump presidency, is that the real judgment is, if Sarah Huckabee Sanders had like written the script, would the show be much different than what you get on Fox News? And for most of the programming, no. The communications, the White House communications might as well have been writing the scripts. Though you saw Chris Wallace did at least put some focus on climate change, and he does ask some questions, although I think the Ben Sasse interview on climate change is, he lets him get away with a couple bogus points, and I'll talk about that more when I get to that. But so now I'm getting to the first subtopic. It's Mueller time. It's still Mueller time. My continuing coverage of the Mueller investigation, which supposedly might have something breaking as early as tomorrow. I talked about that last week when I said it, when the actual topic was it's Mueller time, and I think there are a lot of things possible to break. And when I showed the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, I talked about the case against impeaching Trump from Alan Dershowitz, and how Alan Dershowitz had said some things in defense of Donald Trump and now seemed to be trying to go the other way in this one comment that I'm about to show, where he said the Mueller report is going to be devastating to Donald Trump. And I wanted to point out before I show that pretty much everything else Alan Dershowitz said on ABC's This Week was still kind of defending Donald Trump. I mentioned before that he spent a lot of time impeaching the credibility of Manafort, of Paul Manafort, of Rick Gates, of the other people who have, of Michael Cohen, of Corsi. Is it Jerome Corsi? Is that they mention him here, and that all took place before this clip I'm about to show you. All the people who have flipped, or Corsi is about to flip, possibly. That's the new, what the reporting says, that he's in plea negotiations with Mueller, and if Corsi flips, he can implicate Roger Stone about how the Trump campaign was communicating with WikiLeaks. It could be a big part of, no collusion could turn out to be yes collusion. And anyway, there was a big argument about whether those witnesses are credible or whether Mueller has to make his case just through, like, the documents, the self-proving evidence that doesn't rely on witnesses. Dershowitz was saying that you shouldn't rely on the witnesses because their credibility can be easily impeached. And this is sort of the follow-up, regardless of that, about the information, and that garnered this devastating report comment from Dershowitz that then gets one of the worst follow-up questions, I thought, but then it turns out maybe not so much. It might be the fault of the ABC News legal reporter Dan Abrams, as I will discuss after we watch that 53-second important clip from this morning together over here.
Let's just talk about the information. So we're getting information from Paul Manafort. We're getting information perhaps from Corsi. We're already getting information from Gates, from Cohen, from Phil. That's an awful lot of people tied to the president providing evidence.
It is, and I think the report is going to be devastating to the president. And I know that the president's team is already working on a response to the report. And so at some point, when the report's made public, and that's a very hard question considering the new Attorney General, who has the authority to decide when and under what circumstance to make it public, it will be made public probably with a response alongside. The president will say, look, it's political. There's their account and there's our account, and then the American public will have to judge the credibility.
But for you to say it's devastating is really something,
Well,
Dan.
but let's talk about why someone like Corsi is so important. Some people say, Mueller's...
So when I first saw that clip, I thought that George Stephanopoulos had asked the follow-up question of Dan Abrams about what Alan Dershowitz saying it was going to be devastating, the Mueller report being devastating. But actually what happened there was that George Stephanopoulos was asking the obvious, important follow-up question of Alan Dershowitz. You've been defending Trump all this time. Why are you saying the Mueller report's going to be devastating? And before Dershowitz could answer, Dan Abrams broke in with his whole Jerome Corsi analysis, which bad Dan Abrams, because if you watch the entire interview, and there's a link down in the video description as usual to ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and if you watch the whole interview, Alan Dershowitz never really explained why he would say that it's going to be devastating. Maybe it's just all the information that Mueller has been gathering, and it's not obstruction of justice. I don't know. I guess maybe we'll find out this week, and maybe we will find out in the coming months with the House being taken over by the Democrats, and I mentioned earlier Adam Schiff being interviewed on CNN State of the Union by Dana Bash, and I have a couple clips from that interview. One on the issue of the ongoing Mueller investigation. The other one comes near the end of the program on climate change. I'm sorry, on Saudi Arabia. It's the third to last clip, and I don't want to get into Saudi Arabia now, but I am going to finish up the topic of the ongoing Mueller investigation, which could be the big news of the upcoming week. I kind of thought that last week when I called my Sunday live clip roundup, it's Mueller time. Not that it was going to be during Thanksgiving week, but that it was going to be in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Sometime in 2018, after Mueller is supposed to finish his report. He got the answers the written answers from Trump. He's either going to try to subpoena him or he's going to issue more indictments. Or anyway, this is Adam Schiff talking about what's going on with the Russia investigation. Dan Abash asks him about rumors he's hiring a whole bunch of people who are very skilled in looking into financial crimes. That's what they call forensic accountants and money laundering experts. And anyway, here's a minute and 16 seconds of Adam Schiff talking about why that's all very important to understand the whole Russia investigation, which is actually, if you look at my clip list, the 3-letter abbreviation I have for the whole Mueller probe is still RUS, because it started off with Russia, and it's still a lot about Russia, as Adam Schiff talks about in this clip.
Foreign policy.
There's a report out this week that indicates your committee, you will be the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee in January, is staffing up on money laundering and forensic accounting experts. Is that true? And if so, why?
I don't want to talk about our staffing, but it is certainly true that one of the issues that the Republicans would not allow us to investigate when they were running the committee, and I don't think Congress has looked into this at all, and I don't know that Bob Mueller has, is whether the Russians have been laundering money through the president's businesses. And this is the financial hold that the Russians may have. It would certainly explain the otherwise bewildering conduct of the president in Helsinki, many of the president's comments, pro-Putin comments. It would explain why his sons have said at various times they don't need money from U.S. banks. They get all the money they need from Russia, or a disproportionate share of their assets come from Russia. Is this, again, the hidden hand of American foreign policy, a Russian financial hand? We do need to get an answer to that and be able to tell the American people, yes, it's true, or no, it's not. The American people deserve to know that the president has their interests in mind, not his pecuniary interests.
You mentioned the Mueller investigation. You've said that the acting Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker...
And I'm not going to get into the whole Whitaker thing and whether Matthew Whitaker is legally appointed and all that, although I still have links down in the video description to explain why Matthew Whitaker is not legally appointed. You can check those out at your leisure, but I think that that was sort of a sneak peek into Representative Adam Schiff of California taking over as House Intelligence Committee chair in January of 2019, and the ways that that is going to change our perceptions perhaps of this whole investigation, as he does some financial investigation into ties between Trump and the Trump Organization and Russia and Russian banks, and there's that whole like Bank of Cyprus thing and Deutsche Bank, and I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about that in the future. So that's the It's Still Mueller Time topic, and I think there's going to be breaking news on that maybe as early as tomorrow with the Manafort plea issue, and definitely before the end of 2018. Based on all the thing, maybe I'll be disappointed. You can tell me down in the comment section. This all is hype and I'm crazy, but somehow I think before the end of 2018 there's going to be more indictments, or even the Mueller report to be waiting for the House Democrats when they take over in January 2019. So anyway, that was the It's Still Mueller Time topic. So the next topic I want to cover with 2 clips also is the immigration topic. And I only had 1 clip from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. Amy Klobuchar, I have 2 clips of her, one on immigration and one on the climate change issue. And in some ways, Amy Klobuchar is becoming my early favorite for politicians running for president, although she hasn't announced, of course. But I think she has something that might be a good challenge to our current president, Donald Trump, assuming he's still running for president in 2020 and something hasn't happened to him to make him either no longer be president or no longer be willing to run for re-election. That is something that could happen. But one of the ways that Donald Trump is trying to gin up his base and increase his chances for re-election is by scaring people about immigration. And it looks like there was this big publicity event this week, today in San Ysidro, which, you know, I did my first year of law school at University of San Diego, so I lived in San Diego for a year, and having grown up in the Los Angeles area, I'm also pretty familiar with San Diego and even Tijuana, and the crossing between the two is San Ysidro, which is where this all took place. And there was a pretty good news summary that I found of what happened today on MSNBC's the MSNBC program Kasie DC, which airs on Sundays. I watched Morning Joe a lot over the last year or two, even though Joe Scarborough is, well, the best thing I can say about him is sometimes he's sufferable. You know the term insufferable? A lot of times he's pretty insufferable, but sometimes he's sufferable. And I'm not a big fan of Mika Brzezinski either, but I like some of the news coverage and some of the guests they have, and some of the other pundits are on Morning Joe. So certainly it's more enlightening than Fox and Friends. Although sometimes I watch Fox and Friends because that's the main news source of our president, apparently. But I'm getting way off topic, I'm going off on a big tangent here. And so anyway, they used to introduce Kasie Hunt on Morning Joe with this weird lightning bolt. They did it for like over a year. It's like Kasie Hunt, whose new show is Kasie DC, and they'd have like this sound effect and this lightning bolt across. And I think they just recently stopped doing that. But I actually like Kasie Hunt's show, Kasie DC. I watch it sometimes when I'm just getting ready for the show. And they had on this NBC News reporter. His name is Hans Nichols, and he was in San Ysidro, and also, he's from at Otay Mesa, which is, if you go like the next approved port of entry east from San Ysidro is Otay Mesa, and he's reporting on what happened, and he's pretty good at giving the facts here about tear gas and about, people storming the border. This is, I think, what happened today, which I will talk about with you after we watch this just under a 3-minute clip together over here.
The day unfolded. Earlier this morning, around 9 a.m., a bunch of those migrants were fed up. They decided to leave that camp. Think about 5,000 people sleeping in the size of a middle school baseball field, and that gives you a sense of just how cramped they are. They left, and they initially were rebuffed by federal police from the Mexican state, riot police. They were rebuffed from crossing a bridge to get to the point of entry. Again, this is all on the Mexican side. They then went around. There were a few clashes, there were a few skirmishes. They then went around and crossed a river full of human waste, sludge of a river, and they crossed that trying to get closer to the point of entry. I don't know if it was hundreds, it was more than 1,000. It's hard to estimate size. Men, women, children, old and young. The whole panoply of the caravan was sampled there. They didn't get in there, and then they tried to go further up the border. They broke through a wall, and they were eventually rebuffed, and it seems like now most of them are trickling back into Tijuana. What's unclear here is where they're going to spend the night and whether or not they have any chances of actually filing their asylum claims on the U.S. side of the border. Kasie?
Hans, just to clarify for us, because I think there have been some photos on Twitter of a family being tear gassed. Was that tear gas fired by the Mexican authorities? What was the extent of the involvement on the part of U.S. authorities? And when they broke through that fence, were they actually on U.S. soil, or were they still on the Mexican side?
No, No, it was a restraining fence that was on the Mexican side, so they never breached the U.S. border as far as we could tell. Now, we saw some of the tear gas. We didn't really smell it, and we weren't in the position where the tear gas was taking place. It was a chaotic day. So I don't want to confirm whether or not the U.S. used tear gas because we simply weren't there to witness it. It was a chaotic day, and we're talking about a distance of about anywhere from a mile to a mile and a half where all this took place. And it was it was a fast-moving situation. situation. And so the places where we were at were not tear gassed, although, as you said, there are reports of that. And I'll leave it to those other reports to sort of clarify. But at no point did the migrants either get to the point of entry so they could file their asylum claims, or did they breach the wall. Just to give you a sense of what this caravan's like, I think when we saw some of those migrants coming back, one person of a family was holding a ladder, and the other one was holding a stroller. And that gives you a sense of the makeup of this caravan. Kasie?
Hans Nichols, thank you very much for your Just the Facts reporting. We should also, I think, underscore for everybody that, remember, if you are making a claim of asylum at a legal point of entry, crossing into that legal point of entry is not what we would refer to as undocumented or illegal immigration. That is something that is enshrined in international law and that has been the subject of much of the arguing and the president's frustration with the Ninth Circuit. Jonathan Swan.
And actually, that's one thing I was thinking of covering. I didn't really cover the whole Ninth Circuit thing and the Trump conflict with John Roberts about whether there are Trump judges and Obama judges. That, I don't know, maybe I should make a video about that. But the next clip I want to show you on the immigration issue, after showing that clip, like I said, I thought they did a good job of covering just the facts. I appreciated Hans Nichols there, like, not really confirming the tear gas reports because he didn't see it. Is that like fake news, MSNBC fake news? I don't think so. I think that's journalism. You can tell me what you think down in the comment section. Now, the next clip, I think, is also makes an important point. It's Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, who might be running for president. I think she is, and like I was saying earlier, I think she might be an early favorite of mine. I saw that is true of one of my Super Chat contributors. I appreciate the Super Chat contributors during the show that make up for the loss of YouTube ad revenue. They also, basically make it worth my time spending like 8-10 hours every Sunday putting together this show and broadcasting. Here are the Super Chat contributors so far this show. So, wow, that's really impressive. And I saw Andy M gave like another contribution after I took that screenshot, right after I took that screenshot, and many impressive contributions there that really make me feel supported. But I saw Fodoric at the end there saying Klobuchar 2020. I don't know that much about Amy Klobuchar. I thought she did a pretty good job with the Kavanaugh hearings. Every time I see her, I think, unlike Hillary Clinton, she seems very likable, which is important going up against Donald Trump because I guess she hasn't really had any sort of onslaught from Trump yet. So maybe she's vulnerable in ways I don't know about. Maybe she's more corporatist than I know. You don't get to the Senate without raising money from pro-corporate interests. So you can let me know if you disagree with Fodoric there and you think that Amy Klobuchar isn't an early leader in someone who might make a good candidate. I've talked about how I think like a celebrity like Oprah might be a good candidate against Trump, or like Tom Hanks, or someone who is so beloved that they can't be negged to death by Trump's relentless attacks over the entire campaign. And Hillary Clinton was especially vulnerable to that. And I'm just saying, I don't think Amy Klobuchar is so much, but I'll talk about that with you a little more after we watch the first of the two Amy Klobuchar clips I'm going to show you, which aren't really about her presidential candidacy, but I think show how she really can make some good arguments and comes across as likable, which I hate to be talking about as a real issue, but it's a real issue in trying to find a good presidential candidate to take on Trump if he's still around as president in 2020. And anyway, I've introduced this enough, and this is the final immigration clip, and this is kind of before that breaking news from MSNBC, but talking about some of the same issues. And I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Let me switch subjects right now. The president up and tweeting this morning about this situation at the border now, more migrants coming from Central America through Mexico. Reports of a possible deal with Mexico to hold those people who are applying for asylum in Mexico as their asylum claims are processed. Mexico is now denying that they've agreed to that. But the president did have this tweet this morning. He said it would be very smart if Mexico would stop the caravans long before they get to our southern border, or if originating countries would not let them form as a way to get certain people out of their country and dump in the U.S. no longer. Dems created this problem, no crossings. Your response?
My mom taught second grade until she was 70 years old, and she always told me, if you do something wrong, you don't tell the truth, you take responsibility for it. You don't blame it on the other kid. That's exactly what he's doing here. He controls the White House. His party controls the House and the Senate, and it is on them. What I think that they should do, George, is first of all, he should have been working with these Central American countries a long time ago to try to get to a point where we didn't see this extraordinary amount of people coming through. Secondly, comprehensive immigration reform. He has gut punched us on that a number of times. We have the will to put the money at the border for better security and combine it with some sensible reforms, including things like a path to citizenship, things like making sure that we have workers on our fields and in our factories that we need. But he has chosen instead to weaponize this, to politicize it. And I just think it's wrong for our economy, and it is also wrong for our work with the rest of the world. So he has an opportunity here, especially with a new Congress coming in, to get this done. So it is all rests in that office on him, and he needs to get this done.
That's the new Congress. Still some leftover business for the old Congress. I mentioned that government funding bill. The president said again on Thursday that if he doesn't get that funding for a border wall, a government shutdown is possible. Are you open to any negotiation on this border wall funding?
We have tried to negotiate with him, but he won't take yes for an answer. You look at this. We tried to negotiate on the Dreamers, and that was led by reasonable Republicans like Mike Rounds, a senator from South Dakota, and Johnny Isaacson, the senator from Georgia. I was in that group, a small group of us that were working to find a way out with border money, as well as making sure that we protected the Dreamers, something the vast majority of Americans supported. So, of course, we're willing to talk about this. But if he wants to just keep playing politics with it instead of getting it done, we aren't going to be able to get it done.
So that includes, you say you're willing...
By the way, I'd like to add,
Go ahead.
Farm bill, so important to get Farm bill. We should be getting that done by the end of the year. Again, there's the will in Congress. We need some leadership from the White House, and also criminal justice reform.
Those are three things on the table right now, but you'd be willing to go along with some wall funding to get those?
To get an agreement and to make sure we do something on immigration reform. Remember, when we talk about wall funding, we're talking about border funding, we're talking about personnel, we're talking about a whole grouping of things that protect security. But what I don't think we should do is shut down the government, and that, again, is in his hands and his party's hands.
Another major headline on Friday,
And that's another thing that could be something that turns the tide in the Trump administration, or a big issue coming up, at least in the next week, is Trump's threat to shut down the government if he doesn't get funding for his wall. And I think Amy Klobuchar's answer there is right on, in that she keeps bringing up comprehensive immigration reform in response to Trump's attack on Democrats, that they are responsible for the immigration problems, but they forget that when Obama was president, the Senate and this bipartisan group of senators, and it's so hard to get things through the Senate, they passed comprehensive immigration reform, including, what was it, like $25 billion for border security. That's like more than enough to put walls in places where it makes sense to put walls. And that's kind of what Amy Klobuchar was saying there. And it was the House of Representatives that refused to even put it up for a vote, because it probably would have gotten a majority vote. It just wouldn't have gotten a majority of the majority, and that's the so-called Hastert rule, based on the longest-serving Republican House Speaker and pedophile Dennis Hastert, or pretty much... I don't think I'm going to get in trouble for calling him a pedophile based on the kind of plea deal he had to make on his money structuring charge. But anyway, that's a whole other tangent. And that's the end of the immigration topic. I think Amy Klobuchar, like I said, did a great job of presenting a counterpoint to the way Trump attacks Democrats on immigration. So I guess that's the end of the immigration topic. And so the next topic I want to show you is the climate change topic. Could be the most important topic of all the topics I'm covering, you know, like 30 years from now, future generations looking back on what happened this week. The fact that Trump had his administration release this climate change report on Black Friday, that could give like a whole new meaning to Black Friday and future generations. Like maybe this is the turning point in the tide of rising, rising sea levels, and that's pretty nasty. You saw that, and wildfires, and 10% drop in the GDP of the United States, if that's what's really important to your capitalist sensibilities. And so the first clip I want to show you was also Amy Klobuchar, and she's the first of the 3 climate change clips is Amy Klobuchar, I think, making a good case about things that the United States can do to fight climate change. She doesn't say one thing I think is really important that I'm going to compare these 3 clips on, which is, and especially favorably for Chuck Todd on the NBC Meet the Press clip. I think you have to create some cost for carbon. You know, it's a classic externality. That's where, like, you sell something where you don't pay for the price of some massive, like, social cost. It's like you're cutting down all these trees in a free forest and to make these, like, birdhouses out of the wood, and you don't have to pay for the, public forest, but then we run out of public forest, and who pays for that? Well, carbon in our atmosphere is, an externality, and the only way to make non-carbon solutions more worthwhile is a carbon tax and that doesn't come up in anything but Chuck Todd's clip that comes next. But here's Amy Klobuchar making she doesn't come out in favor of a carbon tax, but George Stephanopoulos doesn't ask her, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
On Friday, major government report on the issue of climate change. We're showing the headlines across the country as this was released on Friday afternoon. You see it right there. Climate report warns of grim economic consequences. Climate change will harm the entire nation. Here in the New York Times, they went on to say the 1,656-page assessment lays out the devastating effects of a changing climate on the economy, health, and environment, including record wildfires in California, crop failures in the Midwest, crumbling infrastructure in the South. All told, the report says climate change could slash up to 1/10 of gross domestic product by 2100. You've said that Congress has to act, but what specifically can be done right now to reverse this?
The greenhouse gas rules, the clean power rules that we're already on the way to getting implemented, we should get those done. Secondly, gas mileage standards. We were clearly on a good path with that, and then this administration stepped backwards. And then finally, going back into the International Climate Change Agreement like every other country. This is a report by the administration, George, and instead of just talking about the science, it talks about the impact on places like I'm from, the Midwest, where you're going to see devastation to our crops. You're already seeing the hurricanes because of the ocean warming, and you're certainly seeing in vivid color those horrible wildfires out west. This is exactly what NASA and our military have predicted for years, and it's time to act on it. So the administration can, on one hand, issue this devastating report showing the facts, and then on the other, do nothing. It's time to act.
But isn't that exactly what's happening? This was released on, what, Friday afternoon of Thanksgiving weekend?
That's exactly what I said. I pointed out the other day, they couldn't pick a day where they tried to get less attention on this report, but I think it backfired, so to say. Because there was no news that day, a lot of people have found out about it, are signing up to get the overview of the report, and I would just suggest that all of your viewers look at that report, look at what it's predicting and the impact on our country, and we have to make this a major issue going into next year.
You are coming off a big re-election victory in the state of Minnesota. Congratulations for that. You did well in a lot of areas where President Trump had done well back in 2016. It sparked a lot of speculation that you might be looking at the 2020 race for president. You've been to Iowa a couple times.
And I'm not going to show the question there that George Stephanopoulos asked, but I did want to sort of show the beginning of the question because, like I said before, I showed those two Amy Klobuchar clips. That I think that she is an early favorite, at least of mine, to be the Democratic candidate if we're going to go with people who are in established political positions like senators and not someone like Oprah or Tom Hanks, because I think she came across as really likable. I think she really had a good delivery of options for fighting climate change. I didn't hear the carbon tax, which, like I said, is something that Chuck Todd, to his credit, brings up with the Republican conservative senator from Utah, Mike Lee, talking about the climate change report. And I think he does not do that great a job answering this. And I think that Chuck Todd does a good job of emphasizing the 10% cut in gross domestic product, the economic consequences of not dealing with climate change, because it kind of short circuits one of the major Republican talking points about how fighting, doing something, regulations, fighting climate change are going to hurt the economy. And Mike Lee is not able to really pivot on that because he still uses those talking points and they seem a little inappropriate. Which I will talk about a little more with you after we watch that Mike Lee clip from NBC's Meet the Press this morning together over here.
Final question. I'm curious your reaction to the climate report. This is from the federal government. Congress, you guys ordered the federal government to do this. And let me read you one of the conclusions. With continued growth in emissions at historic rates, annual losses in some economic sectors are projected to reach hundreds of billions of dollars by the end of the century, more than the current gross domestic product of many U.S. states. Essentially, this document isn't just painting a picture of an environmental catastrophe that's coming, but an economic catastrophe. What are you going to do about it in the U.S. Congress, Senator?
Well, first of all, I look forward to digging into the report and listening to what other experts on the outside have to say about it. I think it's important anytime we take a report like that to examine what public policies they might have in mind, what public policies that could be brought forward that would address the problem they're addressing without simultaneously devastating the U.S. economy. There's no question that for a variety of reasons, and regardless of where one stands on the issue of climate change, that the burning of fossil fuels does emit into the environment a number of things that aren't the healthiest.
Should we put a price on carbon? Are you open to a carbon tax? Are you open to a carbon tax?
No, I'm not. All the proposals I've seen so far that would address any of these issues would devastate the U.S. economy and have little or no benefit that is demonstrable from our standpoint. And so I have yet to see a proposal that would bring this about. I think if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, that's got to be done through innovation. And innovation can be choked out through excessive government regulation. We can't let that happen.
All right, Senator Mike Lee. We had a busy morning. We got to a lot today. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming.
Well, I appreciate Chuck Todd for bringing up the carbon tax. I think the only mention of the carbon tax on any of the Sunday morning news analysis shows, I don't know if that has to do with their corporate sponsorships or what, but they did mention climate change. But I think the carbon tax, I think there should be a big campaign for it. And I think I have a great slogan that will bring the masses to our side. It's internalize our externalities, support a carbon tax. I explained externalities earlier, and that's the second of the three clips on climate change I want to show you, and I think I pretty much discussed it extensively before I showed you the clip. This next one from Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace, like I said, to his credit, he did bring up climate change multiple times during the show. But this whole discussion here, it reminded me of South Park. If you watched South Park this last month, they had the return of Al Gore and Man Bear Pig. And there were some like really funny parts where, you know, Man Bear Pig was an allegory for climate change with Al Gore there, who had been on South Park years ago warning about Man Bear Pig. Well, now the kids on South Park realize he was right all along, but people are like still oblivious about Man Bear Pig, and they're saying, well, maybe we should have discussions about conversations about future talks about what we might do about the possibility of understanding the existence of Man Bear Pig. And that reminds me of what Ben Sasse does here, trying to give the so-called moderate Republican position on climate change in the final of the 3 climate change clips I want to show you tonight over here.
Discussing another threat, and that is the 13 federal agencies came out with something called the National Climate Assessment on Friday, and here are the major findings from that assessment. Temperatures in the U.S. are 1.8 degrees higher than 100 years ago. Seas are 9 inches higher. Heat waves, hurricanes, and wildfires are much worse, and climate change could cut our GDP by 10% by 2100 if there are no changes. Senator, how seriously do you take this report from the Trump administration?
Well, I think it's clear that the climate is changing. I think reasonable people can differ about how much and how rapidly. But I think it's clear that it's changing, and it's clear that humans are a contributing factor. I think the real question, though, becomes what do you do about it? Because you can't legislate or regulate your way into the past. We have to innovate our way into the future. And right now, you don't hear a lot of the people who put climate as their #1 issue. You don't hear a lot of them offering constructive, innovative solutions for the future. It's usually just a lot of alarmism. But I think the report is important, and it shows that the climate is changing.
But, for instance, you oppose what you call EPA overreach, including President Obama's climate change plan. According to the report, rolling that back, which would limit greenhouse gas emissions, is exactly the wrong approach.
Yeah, well, I think we have to recognize that this is a global issue, and China and other countries that are rapidly building middle classes are going to be the #1 drivers in the long term. So what the U.S. needs to do is participate in a long-term conversation about how you get to innovation, and it's going to need to be a conversation, again, that doesn't start with alarmism, but that starts with some discussion of the magnitude of the challenge, the global elements to it, and how the U.S. shouldn't just do this as a feel-good measure, but some sort of innovative proposal. And right now, that's not really what I get from most of the people who make this a top 2 or 3 issue for themselves.
But just quickly, and I want to move on to other subjects, China, for instance, is trying to grow into the future and has become a huge investor in solar panels. There was an international agreement in which countries made commitments, the Paris Climate Accord, and the president is going to pull us out of that. So isn't much of the rest of the world actually moving faster than we are?
So I want to distinguish between the 2 parts of your answer. I think the first part about Chinese investment does show part of the way forward. The U.S. needs to have a long-term investment and innovation strategy. That's true. But things like the Paris Climate Accords tend to be more binding on us than on other nations. And so that's not good for the U.S. consumer, and it's not a long-term solution. But conversations like that are certainly important going forward.
All right. Let's turn to another big story.
So that was, like I said, the moderate Republican position, much less preferable than the Amy Klobuchar position I showed in the first clip. You know, credit to Fox News Sunday for bringing up the topic, but not really cross-examining him on the later discussion of the conversation about the possibility of the existence of Man Bear Pig, although he did ask him, are you going to take this climate change report serial? No, he said serious. But anyway, so that's the last of the clips on climate change. So the final topic I want to cover now is the ongoing controversy with Saudi Arabia. And does Trump have like financial ties, or why is he like covering for this murder by the Saudi Arabian royal family and the Crown Prince MBS Mohammed bin Salman? And also, I've talked for weeks since this happened about how that's not really what we should be mad at Saudi Arabia for, or like cutting off aid. It's more what's going on in Yemen especially. And I have Senator Mike Lee from the last segment, and then Senator Bernie Sanders talking about that. But first I want to show you Adam Schiff talking about, as the incoming House Intelligence Committee chair, currently the ranking member, saying basically Trump is not being honest with the American people about what our intelligence is telling us about the killing of Jamal, did I call him Adnan Khashoggi? Jamal Khashoggi, or however you pronounce his name, over in this clip.
Specifically on the murder of Khashoggi, the president says the CIA has not reached a final conclusion on whether the Saudi Crown Prince at least knew about it. The top Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee, Jack Reed, says flatly the president's lying about that. Do you know, have you seen the CIA assessment, and is the president lying?
I have been briefed by the CIA, and while I cannot discuss the contents of the briefing in any way, I can say that I think the president is being dishonest with the American people. I don't know why. It's certainly not atypical. Frankly, the president has been dishonest with the country about a great many things. But I think what is most important here is we need to speak up for our democratic values. The president, you know, it'd be one thing if the president were leveling with the American people and saying, okay, this is what happened, this is what we know, this is what took place, but nonetheless, we need to maintain a relationship with the kingdom. But that's not what he's doing. And I just think that it causes our standing in the world to plummet. It telegraphs to despots around the world they can murder people with impunity, and that this president will have their back as long as they praise him, as long as they do business with him potentially. And that cannot be the guiding principle behind our foreign policy.
There's a report out this week that indicates you're...
So if you don't believe from the Democrat Adam Schiff that President Trump is being dishonest, what about conservative Republican Mike Lee from Utah, who says that he disagrees with Trump's assessment, although he hasn't seen everything the president has seen? Adam Schiff probably has seen everything as the ranking House Intelligence Committee member. But here you see Mike Lee say he disagrees with Trump. It's inconsistent with what he's heard. And then actually he talks about Yemen. This is that weird congruence of liberal and conservative Mike Lee. And then the next clip and final clip I'll show will be Bernie Sanders talking to Margaret Brennan on CBS's Face the Nation, talking about a bill, a bipartisan bill they've co-sponsored to get out of the war in Yemen, which is a much bigger issue than the killing of this journalist, which is bad enough. But here's Mike Lee making more sense than in the previous Mike Lee clip, talking to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press, and also showing the most egregious clip from Donald Trump saying who's accountable, who should be accountable for the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. It's the world, because the world is just a vicious place. Over in this clip.
Speak to the issue with Saudi Arabia. Here was the president pushing back on the CIA assessment, not necessarily a conclusion, but it's their best. It's an assessment of high confidence that the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia ordered the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Here's the president responding to it.
It's a very important ally. And if we go by a certain standard, we won't be able to have allies with almost any country. Okay?
Who should be held accountable?
Maybe the world should be held accountable, because the world is a vicious place. The world is a very, very vicious place.
Here's what Fred Ryan, the publisher of the Washington Post, wrote in response to the president's dismissal of the CIA assessment. A clear and dangerous message has been sent to tyrants around the world. Flash enough money in front of the President of the United States and you can literally get away with murder. Is he right?
I disagree with the president's assessment. It's inconsistent with the intelligence I've seen. Now, look, I don't have access to everything the president sees. I'm not sure what he's relying on. The intelligence I've seen suggests that this was ordered by the Crown Prince, and is yet another reason why I've been pushing and why I joined forces with Bernie Sanders back in February to get us out of fighting Saudi Arabia's civil war effort in Yemen against the Houthis. I think this is yet another indication that this unauthorized, unconstitutional war, from our standpoint, is not something that we ought to be fighting. This is not an ally that deserves this kind of military intervention, especially because there's been no connection between the safety of the American people and our involvement in this war. It's one of the reasons why we've got to get out now. And I believe this is an opportunity for the Congress to weigh in and say, let's halt our efforts in Yemen.
Is it fair to ask the question, what is the president's motives behind siding with the Saudis? And should Congress look in to see if he's got financial motivations into why he might be siding with the Saudis over the CIA?
Look, I don't know why he's siding with the Saudis, but I think there are things we can do to change our relationship with the Saudis, notwithstanding whatever his personal motivations might be. I'm also certain that in the next Congress, people will look into that. But again, I think Congress has to take some ownership of U.S. foreign policy, especially as it relates to our intervention in this war, our unconstitutional fighting of a civil war in Yemen that has never been declared by the U.S. Congress is a problem. And that's on us.
Final question.
So, like I said, that's Senator Mike Lee making a lot more sense than in the previous clip on climate change. And also, as I previously said, having some strange confluence of agreement with Senator Bernie Sanders, the independent from Vermont, a very, Democratic socialist, going with the Republican conservative senator from Utah on this whole Yemen issue, which, like I've said many times in the past, is much more of this one. I think Bernie Sanders makes that very clear in the final news clip I want to show to you tonight over here.
You do talk about in your book is your call for pulling back any kind of U.S. support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen. There is a resolution you have backed along with Republican Mike Lee. Do you see, given the scrutiny in the wake of the killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, new support for this bill?
I do. When we brought this up, I think it was in March, we ended up with 44 votes, only 5 Republicans. I think we now have a chance to get a majority of the United States Senate. I think people are looking at the horrific humanitarian disaster now taking place in Yemen. There was a recent report that over the last number of years, some 75,000 children have died of starvation. This is a country dealing with cholera, a country dealing with a terrible level of famine. So you got that issue. You got the issue that this war was never authorized by the United States Congress in violation of our Constitution. And you got the Khashoggi incident, which says that we have a Saudi government led by a despotic ruler who killed a political opponent in cold blood. Add that all together. I think the American people in Congress are now saying, let us end the support, our support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen.
You are calling for Democrats.
So very good sense there, good policy from Senator Bernie Sanders. I voted for him in the Democratic primary, as I've mentioned many times, though I voted for Hillary Clinton in the general election 2016. And so I'm kind of a Bernie Sanders fan, even though I'm not necessarily supporting him over Amy Klobuchar, as I talked about earlier. But that's the last Saudi Arabia clip, and I think it really emphasizes what the real problems are with Saudi Arabia, with the war in Yemen, the real humanitarian costs, and I think Bernie Sanders did the best job of exposing that of the clips that I could have taken from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. I hope you appreciate the clips I picked out for you today. I did promise you a bonus Sandy and Dash clip. It actually took a lot of effort because Sandy is like lying over there and Dash is in this corner over there over this vent where I have some boxes, and I couldn't get them together. I was trying. I got Sandy first and then Dash over there on the vent, and I had to like crawl over by the boxes, and I knocked over one of my lights here, which knocked over my camera, and I had to like reframe the whole thing. I think that's what I have the camera like higher up at like a downward angle, or I don't know. Does it seem different this week? Anyway. To show you how this is the Sandy and Dash clip that I picked out for my Sandy and Dash fans, and knocked over the camera and the light and delayed the show over here. Sandy, you ready for the show? don't know, you don't seem that excited, and I can't seem to get Dash out here. Dash. Are you hiding? Well, I guess there's a heater vent there. So there you go, the bonus Sandy and Dash clip. I appreciate all of you who showed up for the live show, the Super Chat contributors, the people who support me on Patreon with your monthly patron contributions, the one-time contributions I get through the PayPal link and the Patreon links also down in the video description. I'm way over time. I may have time to put out an edited produced video. If you want to vote on which of the topics that I should make a shorter edited produced video about, click on this poll over here in the corner. I will either make it about the ongoing Mueller investigation, the immigration issue, the climate change issue, or the Saudi Arabia issue. Which one do you think would make the best video? You can let me know by answering this poll question. I'll try to make that video this week. I'm busy on Monday. Maybe on Tuesday I might have a chance to make it, or on Thursday. We'll see. And I will definitely be back next week and for every Sunday for the foreseeable future, spending all day Sunday picking out the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows and bringing them to you so that you can watch them and comment on them with me. And I will be back doing that every Sunday for the foreseeable future, like I said. And until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.